Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and I hope you are all doing well. Located alongside the Nile River in Upper Egypt is a vast and ancient structure, filled with mysteries wrought in stone, gigantic artifacts, and clues to the deepest parts of human civilization. Karnak Temple, with its satellite Luxor Temple, is often cited as the largest religious complex in the world, ancient or not. And the fact that even our orthodox dating has it at least 3,000 to 3,500 years old makes this citation that much more remarkable. Yet there are many clues that can be found here that indicate a potentially far older date for the origins of this complex, along with evidence for a technological paradox, one shared with many Old Kingdom sites like Giza, Saqqara or Abu Sir. The paradox of the oldest stonework being far more sophisticated than latter additions, and, like on Old Kingdom sites, at Karnak we can find the signatures of advanced machining, overcuts into granitic stone, gigantic tubular drills, and monstrously large single-piece artifacts. Further, a potential deep antiquity for some of the infrastructure is hinted at by tremendous levels of erosion and some very strangely affected granodiorite blocks that are literally crumbling apart. Any internet search on the origins of Karnak Temple will tell you that dozens of ancient Egyptian pharaohs left their mark here, with most construction occurring over more than 1,000-year period between the 12th and 20th dynasties, stretching from the Middle Kingdom to the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt. Most notably, much of Karnak and Luxor is attributed to a ruler that viewers of this channel should be well familiar with, Ramses II of the 19th dynasty, as evidenced by his name being deeply carved into many of the walls and artifacts found here. I've covered the issues with this method of dating stonework or artifacts, the problems with the "he who wrote on it must have built it" approach, in several videos on this channel. But even in Orthodox history, there is some acknowledgement that Ramses usurped older and superior pieces in his work. In other places on these sites, you can find evidence that the ancient structures we see today have been built over deeper layers of even older architecture, mostly hidden now by the renovation work that was conducted in later periods. So, I hope you'll join me in this video as we explore many of the mysterious and remarkable attributes of the awe-inspiring ancient sites of Karnak and Luxor temples. Before we dive into the video, I want to quickly mention a couple of upcoming events. There are still a couple of spots available for the soon-to-be-happening Mega Floods of the Ice Age tour of Montana that the Snake Bros and I will be attending, and it'll be led by Randall Carlson and Brad from Cosmographia. It's happening in mid-September 2023, and the link to check it out if you're interested is below in the video description. I'm also happy to announce that I've joined the speaker roster for the upcoming Conference of Precession and Ancient Knowledge, or CPAC, that's held on the 20th to the 22nd of October 2023 in Palm Springs, California. I'm very much looking forward to this event, as I'll be speaking alongside some of my idols, friends and colleagues, people like Graham Hancock, Christopher Dunn, Hugh Newman, Jimmy Corsetti and more. Again, the link for more info is below in the description. Lastly, a reminder that this channel is run on the value for value model. I don't do sponsorships or this video brought to you by today segments. But hey, maybe the 500th email to me from Raid Shadow Legends might eventually do the trick, who knows. That said, if you do get some value from my work, please do consider returning some of that to me, be it in time, talent or treasure, at whatever level of value seems right to you. You could sign up on Patreon, Subscribestar or on channel memberships, or you could send me a tip for a coffee, or reach out to me with your talent, like Simon Reynolds from CreateVideo.nz did, and he created my epic new intro video, for which I'm very grateful. There are lots of ways to support the channel and my work. They're all outlined on my website at unchartedx.com/support. And as always, many sincere thanks to those who do choose to support me. I really couldn't do this work without you. The temples of Karnak and Luxor are but two of the many incredible sites in the antiquity-rich region of the modern city of Luxor. And in fact, this city has been built up around these monuments. Constructed atop the ancient Egyptian capital known as Thebes, the Luxor region is home to something like a full third of all of the world's antiquities. Situated on the River Nile in Upper Egypt, which is in the south of the country, Luxor is around 400 miles to the south of the Giza Plateau and about 110 miles north of Aswan, which is the source for much of the granite used in the structures. Luxor today is one of the major tourist hubs in Egypt. It's a busy port for the popular Nile cruises, the launch pad for day trips to Dendera and Abydos, which is the temple of Seti I, and the mighty Assyrion that's out the back. Across the river from Luxor is the famous west bank of the Nile. That's home to more ancient sites than I could reasonably mention, but highlights include the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, the Ramesseum with its 1,000+ ton granite statue, the tombs of the nobles, the temple of Hatshepsut, and the Colossi of Memnon, which guard the gates to the massive temple of Amenhotep III, still a very active archaeological site where they're unearthing more and more giant single-piece statues. If you do ever find yourself in Luxor, don't miss the opportunity to take one of the daily hot air balloon flights at dawn over the West Bank. It would be tough to find a more picturesque and beautiful view as the sun rises over the Nile, and you're afforded a unique perspective on the many ancient ruins in this area. Both Karnak and Luxor temples have been known of, visited and written about throughout the ages, but for much of recent millennia they were in a considerable state of disrepair. Before the major excavations and restorations of the 18th and 19th century could begin, the local people living inside the structures had to be removed, as the area had been continuously occupied for many thousands of years. And it turns out that giant stone pylons or columns are fairly handy when it comes to setting up a domicile or for finding a shady spot to tie up your donkey. Early photographs from this time can give us a sense of the scale of restoration work that has been done here, and it's work that continues to this day. Statues are being restored with concrete sculpting, something that I'm 50-50 on if I'm honest, although there's no mistaking the modern work for the hardstone perfection of the ancients. And large blocks of stone are still being moved around, even if we seem to need modern equipment to do it.
Yo, what's up, Moonraker? How you doing, bro? Guns, thanks.
We found proof of how they lifted up the obelisk.
And the pre-workout flex.
As mentioned, Karnak and Luxor temples are these days inside
What's
the
up, bro?
modern
The
city of Luxor,
pre-flex.
but the ancient connection between the two sites has been recently restored. An avenue lined with
Skyline chili flex
1,300 sphinxes runs for more than 1.5 miles, or around 3 kilometers, between the two locations, and it was likely originally constructed during the New Kingdom. It's one of many examples of the continuous renovation, repair and expansion work that took place on these sites, not only during the dynastic period, but right through to relatively modern times. The Romans added their marks here. Chambers inside Luxor Temple were converted, plastered over and painted by Coptic Christians. And there is currently still an Islamic mosque built
it's my chest day as well.
Site,
Hell yeah, man.
with the call to prayer
Nice,
providing
dude.
a haunting backdrop to the tourists who are visiting the site under the lights.
Skyline cheese dog can create. Yeah, really. Nice. Nice, the White Owl. Nice, bro. We're gonna get a little connected first.
I mention all of this work on the site because it is through this lens of renovation and rework that we must view the evidence that's found here today. I've visited Karnak and Luxor multiple times at this point. They're both absolute highlights for any trip to Egypt, but they're vast complexes, particularly Karnak at a massive 200 acres, and it's impossible to take it all in on a single visit. What's more, there is tremendous nuance and detail to be found here. And rather than try and cover everything in a single video, I want to share with you some of the most interesting aspects that I've found on these ancient sites in my time here. Overall, there is an interesting juxtaposition of ancient technology on these sites. Both temples feature what I would call a granite core, central structures and artifacts made from megalithic blocks of very hard stone that in several locations display the telltale signs of advanced machining techniques. Around these granitic cores, the majority of the stonework, this is the mighty pylons and the hypostyle halls, is all comprised of sandstone, which is a substance that is far, far softer than granite and much easier to work. This really doesn't deter from their scale and majesty, however. Walking around inside the great halls of Karnak or Luxor is an experience like no other, with their soaring heights and beautiful inscriptions, some even with colour still visible after so many thousands of years. These parts of Karnak and Luxor are, in my opinion, unquestionably spectacular achievements by the dynastic civilizations of the Middle and New Kingdom. But is it possible that they were constructed around or even over a pre-existing infrastructure? Despite the attribution of the temples to the Middle and New Kingdom, there are, in a few places, the names of Old Kingdom pharaohs written here. So it seems likely that there was something here in the early times of the dynastic civilization. Much of the granitic work in the core of the sites matches architectural styles found on Old Kingdom sites like Giza or Saqqara. Even the obelisks, which are often and incorrectly thought to be solely the product of the New Kingdom, are connected to the Great Pyramids with their Benben stones, and historically the oldest and largest known standing obelisk was that at Abu Ghurab, a 5th dynasty sun temple of the Old Kingdom. Today, only the pedestal for this obelisk remains, but it's a huge platform that is sometimes mistaken for a broken down pyramid, and it gives a sense of scale for just how massive this obelisk truly was. Perhaps the best demonstration of the significant technological delta found at Karnak and Luxor can be given by an examination of the columns. The huge sandstone columns are no doubt impressive, and evidence for their method of construction can be found just inside the first pylon or gate at Karnak. Here we can see an unfinished column, still rough on the outside, showing just how the final product was achieved. Sandstone blocks are piled up and then shaped and shaved down to give them their distinctive form. As large as they are, the effort and technology required to make one of these is a world apart from that required to make a single piece monolithic granite column. That's not to mention that the granite had to be shipped into the site from over 100 miles away, while the source for the sandstone was relatively local. Several of these monolithic granite columns can still be found in a central structure at Luxor.
See the granite pillars? All granite pillars, and then these are sandstone, stacked sandstone rounds.
So older and then...
Right, so these are trying to replicate probably these older pillars here. And the whole thing's granite here in the center too.
I think these statues in particular were here, if not, and maybe they moved, or this temple was built around them and then dedicated to Ramses.
You have the same thing, these columns, these single-piece granite columns. See, and this is, Yusuf would call this most likely pre-dynastic pyramid builder culture.
See, and these columns, this stuff is likely Ramses and dynastic, but you have a mix here. It's a real mix where they've inherited stuff, and Ramses is really
That's a sick emote, man.
They're marvels of stonework, complete
What
with
happened to it? Where did vape fly
some
go?
very rough inscriptions, but it's even acknowledged that these were likely reused by Ramses II, and were in fact much older when his men worked on this site. In my recent presentation video, The Tale of Two Industries, I showed how across multiple types of artifacts, there exists both a sophisticated and a relatively primitive industry or method of manufacturing and stonework. From vases to boxes, slabs, columns, even pyramids, reverence and imitation seem to have been key drivers for the primitive industry. Work that was done perhaps with an intent to capture some of the significance or power of the more remarkable and older artifacts. When you compare the shape and the form of the granite column at Luxor to the sandstone example that's right next to it, you can clearly see the same principles of imitation and reverence in action. Although they're larger, these sandstone columns are, at least to my eye, obvious imitations of the amazing and older monolithic works of granite. And these are almost certainly much older. While sandstone columns like these pretty much are restricted to the works of the New Kingdom, the perfectly formed, huge, single-piece granite columns go all the way back to the very oldest of sites, which originally contained dozens of them. Examples of these types of columns from Old Kingdom sites like Saqqara or Giza can be found in the Cairo Museum, or there's some examples in the British Museum, and all of these are pretty much unadorned with any inscription. Yet more of these columns can be found on a visit to Islamic Cairo, which has many granite columns that were sourced from the Old Kingdom sites around the city, and then later reused in mosques. The remnants for a veritable forest of monolithic granite columns can similarly be found at Tanis in the north in the Delta, and I take any chance that I can get to share the very best example of one of these that I've ever seen. It's the flared end piece from a huge granite column, and it's found at another site in the Delta, the Temple of Bastet. I will do a video specifically on columns and obelisks in the near future. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I've also heard some outright fabrications from certain channels who seem to like making videos about my work, claiming that I think that the Roman columns of the Pantheon were Egyptian. I can't say I'm surprised at being misrepresented.
I got some religious songs.
I've had at this point. But hey,
not because I'm particularly religious, but not there's nothing wrong with that.
I think they need their magic crystal ball of what I think tuned
I went
up a
to
little bit,
the Spin Top
because
Festival
although the
and we
granite
played
is
guitar
sourced from Aswan,
for service.
these columns were
So
shaped
I
by
got all
Romans.
these songs that I'm
And
going to
believe
learn.
me when I say there's a world of difference between these columns, which are imprecise and tapered from the bottom to the top, when they're compared to the perfectly made and flared examples that we can find in ancient Egypt. And that's a difference.
Great, thanks, man.
In
Yeah.
that video.
And I can play like the notes, like
However, it's
'cause
not
each
just
song is
round
literally like
granite
4
columns
notes.
that are found
Dude,
in
once you know
Karnak,
music,
but
it's
also
so easy to
square
write a
granite
song. It's
pillars,
insane.
which are similar to those found in the Valley Temple at Giza, or like those
The
in
classics.
the Synagogue at Abydos.
Yeah, that's true.
These pieces at Karnak are utterly remarkable, with stunning lotus and palm high-relief
Darth
carvings.
Vader Vapor.
On the
a little bit of
pillars at
knee.
Karnak, there are
That's weird,
low-relief
bro.
carvings on the side.
I try to hide
and
my
above
knees.
the lotus flower, we can see high-relief hieroglyphic carvings. While these are unquestionably of a high quality, as with many of the glyphs that can be found at Karnak, they're still the result of hand tools and chisels. If you look closely at these glyphs, particularly looking at this corner or this line here, you can see that the carving is actually inset into the stone. It's not raised up higher than the base surface of the pillar as the lotus carving is. So if this was originally a flat surface above the lotus flower, all that's required is to carve the negative space away, and voila, there are your high-relief glyphs. This technique reminds me of one of my videos on the subterranean resonance chambers at the Giza Plateau, where the same technique of carving high-relief figures that are inset into the wall was used.
That's the song. That's the whole song. Over and over.
What we are saying, what we saying, that it's possible that it was not a tool before. It was something like the Brazilian shaft, which also.
Your own guitar is nice. Aw, it's all good, man. Dude, I would recommend just learning like the chords, A to G, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G chords.
Is connected to the middle pyramid structure, not separated. So this.
Because I know maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 chords. And I could play like a bunch of songs.
Originally part of the pyramid complex, not separated.
What I'm saying is it's really easy. If you break it down like that.
We can't say
'Cause then you
when
can
this
just
work was
read.
done, but it would be hard
Short
to
trump-like
definitively
fingers, yeah.
claim that these statues found here
You can do
are
the chords,
contemporary
nice.
with the original work of carving out the chamber.
That's all
As
good, man.
All you'd need to do this is
That's
a
good
flat
pressure,
wall
man.
To carve the
That's better
negative
pressure.
space away. And
The more pressure on the
likewise, in
string, I
case
think
of
the
the
better.
pillar at
The
Karnak,
more coverage
all
of the
you would need
fret,
is the flat surface
right?
of stone. Still, it's amazing work, and I've always maintained that the carving of the
And with this, you could just
hieroglyphic
read the
language
music.
became a high art form.
You know,
in
just read the
ancient
notes.
Egypt, as it unquestionably was during the New Kingdom. And we see the results of that in the amazing glyphs that are written at Karnak. All that said, so far as I've seen, there is nothing in any of these high-quality writings that are found on obelisks or the other artifacts that precludes them from being
Oh, no
achieved
way,
with
dude.
flint hand tools.
That's
If you
sick,
take
dude. I got a
close
strat
look
right
into
here,
any
man.
of the corners of these
I have one
carved
electric
glyphs,
guitar, it's
it'll
a
still
Strat.
reveal the telltale signs of chiseling.
I think I've showed it to you
In
before.
many
maybe.
of my other videos,
Paisley?
we've explored the technological depth involved in creating the granite structures and artifacts that come from the oldest times of civilization. And we've explored how their construction really wasn't achievable with the tools and techniques known to have been used during these times. This conclusion is just one of many that leads us to the potential for a longer history of civilization, and the possibility of inheritance, relabeling, and reuse playing a large role in the establishment of the Old Kingdom. I think aspects
So the
of
American-made
stonework
ones are
of
better
Karnak
quality,
and
but they're more
Luxor
expensive.
may well
This
fit
was
this
500
category.
bucks.
And what's more,
The
there
American-made
is
quality is
quite
like
a bit of
800,
evidence
900.
for a very ancient past here. In a tucked-away corner of the Great Hall at Karnak, near the granite core of the site, floor tiles have been removed to show a deeper and older layer. What we're seeing below the level of the existing hall is the base for a column, but it's not made from sandstone like all of the others.
Yo, what's up,
Rather,
Christian? How you
it's
doing,
made
man?
from white calcite or alabaster.
I
Quite
wasn't.
clearly, before the great sandstone
paying
hall
for
of
the
the
American
New
version.
Kingdom
Yeah.
was erected, there was another set of columns here.
Mexican.
Close to
in
this
Australia,
location,
shit,
in the
dude, that
area
sucks.
around the obelisk, we
Yeah,
can
it's
find
crazy. I
more
paid 500
of these
USD.
alabaster bases. It's evident that they're not coordinated with or part of the current hypostyle hall. The material used here is also a clue, as white calcite bases were often combined with single-piece granite columns. We also know that these alabaster bases were in use from the earliest times, and were even recycled or repurposed as early as the 5th dynasty. I have a video on the Old Kingdom recycling of stone that shows an example of a reused alabaster column base at Giza, which was quarried and converted into an offering table.
Here we are in the 4th dynasty tomb of Ra'wel, and it was excavated by the Professor Salim Hassan. We can see over there his offering hall, and we can see in this offering hall, if we look over here, the offering tables that he used. We put the stone masonry here is reflecting definitely the capability of the 4th dynasty, but the stones here. We have this one over here.
It's a pillar base, yeah.
This was his offering hall. And this, as we can see here, was one of the offering tables. But the Professor Salim Hassan mentions that this is a very odd shape for an offering table, because we are never used to see them round. I recognize this very well. This is the base of a pillar. And obviously it was being reused in this structure. So the base of the pillar will be from this part lower underground, and only this part will be above the ground, and then the pillar was going to be on top of it. That's a base of this is an evidence of recycling. Here also, to give you more evidence, here you can see that this is perfectly round. Okay? You see that? Here we can see another base of a pillar that was used also as an offering table. But look here, the circle is not complete. Is it clear? It is clear.
Yeah.
That the circle here was carved. Why? To put the depiction of the priest. And we can see here the inscription and his name down here. Ra Well. This is the priest from the fourth dynasty. Yes. So here we have a conclusive evidence that shows that stone was being recycled since the old kingdom.
It begs the question, just how old might these be if they're already being quarried and recycled in the Old Kingdom? There is another and much more quantifiable indicator of significant age for some of the work here, and it's something I only just became aware of on my most recent visit to Karnak, having walked past it many times in the past. Towards the back of the complex, out in what is now an open area, are several rose granite blocks that have been severely eroded. In fact, at this point, they almost look like unfinished raw granite. These were originally finished pieces, likely flat with square corners, perhaps only a small fragment of what might once have been a structure here in this spot. You can even find evidence for stone joinery, the bow tie method of connecting pieces together or for repairing cracks. The granite today is literally crumbling and falling apart from exposure and erosion. When I first posted images of these stones on social media, their poor condition caused someone to respond that it wasn't even granite, which it most definitely is, likely sourced from Aswan. It takes a very long time for this sort of erosion to occur in stone like this naturally. On my last trip to Karnak, we happened to have a qualified geologist along with us, Chuck Kinzer, who discussed the granite that's found here.
In this case, this could have had sharp corners, like the piece above, right? By Brian's elbow. But you notice
Man, I bought this Fender acoustic in Miami for $100 used.
the most surface area, right? So that very tiny corner is easy to erode, and then it goes. Eventually, this will end up round. So another thing is the minerals degrade at different rates. So this pink is a orthoclase feldspar, right? So it will degrade more than faster than the quartz that's in this. Granite has 5 different minerals and certain percentages and whatnot. And you'll see that. So any of these rocks that are kind of crumbly like
Yeah,
that,
this
see it
one's
look,
made in China.
right? That's just weathered. And
It's pretty good. It doesn't sound that good though. It sounds okay.
so
It just
that's
doesn't
what you
sound
see here. Get that to
smooth. It's
happen.
twangy.
This bow tie, that's what I was talking about over here. This is
Maybe it
this
needs
was
better
painted, they
pickup,
put
like
a
this.
crack
Like look
and
at this
put
fucking
something here,
shit.
they were
Look at this
tying
shit.
something to it, but those bow tie shapes are common even today. But this, and I think the pieces on top, they could have been doing something. Someone could have been making their cereal up there. I don't know. Who knows? But not really. And so, but when you see this way,
Oh wow, insane.
You can do it 2 different ways.
What's the brand? What's the model?
It'll be from long time weathering, right?
Thanks, man.
You go to state parks, things like that.
I have a semi.
Rocks have been exposed for
Damn.
hundreds of thousands
Just practice out it, yeah.
of years and look this bad sometimes.
But it just
But they're out in the winter,
fucking
dry.
is amazing. You just fucking literally rock out.
Or there was a fire around it. And if you think about it, just like
Dreadnought.
something up and cool it down, it can break,
Crazy.
and it works over the edges. So
I
I
heard
don't
of it.
know. But this being a big piece like this laying around, now that thing was shaped a long time ago. And to do that, I mean, that's not going to happen in 10,000 years. 50 years?
How hot
50,
of a
50
fire?
I
this.
know.
How hot of a
It
fire?
could be longer than that.
Like, can you do this with campfires? Or
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
throw a
I
rock
need
in a
this-
campfire.
But
once,
over and over and over and over.
But only the surface, like it's
Only
not
the
going to
surface is
penetrate.
gonna go, right?
Yeah,
And so, but this to me looks like this has been soaking in water a little bit too. So again, those feldspars are going to kind of fall
Degrade
apart
first,
right? And they take the rest with them.
yeah.
So like mine. Exactly the same as mine. So mine's a dreadnought.
It's on it.
Yeah.
Versus
if it was
concert.
acidic, yes, it would.
Fuck's concert.
But I don't know. There's so much limestone around here.
Concert.
It's not acidic because the limestone would be gone. Yeah, this is an alkaline soil. Yeah. So that's what I think about this. When we walk by,
Is it skinnier?
It's clearly something to pay attention to. That's as much of an expert I could be in 20 minutes.
Cheers.
Concert.
Erosion on granite that wouldn't
Shit.
happen in 10,000 years
Phosphor
isn't the only
V10.
strange condition found on hard stone at Karnak. Something far more mysterious is going on in a normally off-limits area of the temple, in a tucked-away alcove that's part of the granitic core of the site. The
Holy shit, it's
dark-coloured
complicated,
granite
man.
here has undergone some sort of transformation. At least that's the best way that I can describe it. The surface of the intact pieces are cracked, as if it suffered from some sort of immense pressure from the inside of the stone. Further into the alcove, we can observe some broken pieces of the same material, and something very interesting seems to have occurred. The outer layer, or the outer couple of inches of the stone, seems to be intact, but it's as if the inside of the material has degenerated, perhaps swelling in the process, and causing the pieces to then crack and break. I don't really know how to explain it, and over the years my good friend Yusuf Aoun has consulted several expert geologists about the condition of this stone, none of whom have been able to explain what's happened here. It's not geopolymer, although I await the inevitable comments claiming otherwise. If I've learned one thing in the last few years, it's that it doesn't matter how many times I explain the evidence or legitimate reasons that geopolymer is a silly theory, particularly when it comes to granite or other igneous rock. Some folks are just entirely married to the idea. Just send me a bag of it and we'll start a landscaping empire, I promise.
Literally, the core of this granite
Looks nice. Looks nice, man. Looks like a nice guitar.
crumbling. And the surface is still solid. Until now, as I mentioned for you earlier, this became a very confusing transformation of the stone for geologists, not anybody. So Robert Chuck, I was here with him and I showed this for him. I played one of the tours that he was on, and also our teacher.
Yeah, sounds about right.
In the chemistry school, and it's mysterious. They both said, I don't know, and I still don't know. Robert Chuck was not convinced that the minerals of the stone will be extended just from moving the stone from one location to the next. And it's here where we want to go, like we were looking for this other night. Huh? You see now these cracks? Because that expand that happened in the core of the stone when the minerals of it extend. This is what caused this crack. It's not geopolymer. It's not the effect of something that was molded. But look here. Here is the material itself. This is the stuff that is in the core. This is the type of granite that
I think it's just the global coup, man. They're, exactly, it's all related. Like the World Economic Forum, they're trying to take over Canada and in Australia. Those are the fronts. We're like at the front of the global elites.
you can see almost even
It's fucked, man.
layer
They're trying to
of
fucking
the stone in a good condition, and then the
sewer
core
our
is the part
economies,
that somehow,
steal our
because
resources,
of that mineral extent, the
blame us
structure
for
of it changed
global warming. Like, it's so
and
insane.
became crumbling.
It's just so insane.
Your opinion or Susan's opinion on how that can happen?
We don't know. She's investigating this and
We gotta fucking stand together, my man.
any more information about the granodiorite. She said the more I investigate, the more it becomes crazy. This is what she said.
I've seen this in the mountains. I've seen
Yeah.
that's all part of the mountains. The mountains, high in the mountains. Right.
Like this would usually be here on the surface, and then the core would be the solid, right?
Right.
Here it's the opposite. The core is crumbling, and the surface is solid. Like this crumbling one is inside this cracked one. Exactly. That's why we understand how the stone can deteriorate and crumble from the normal thing. What we don't understand is how it can crumble on the inside and stay solid on the outside. So this extended, and this is what called release cracks. But this is solid. This is the part that crumbles. It's cracked because of the extent of minerals that happen in the core, which shows as well that this transformation happened after the stone was shaped.
Some unknown process has transformed the hard stone in this part of the temple, and this happened after the blocks were cut. It's literally crumbling apart. I really don't have an explanation for it, but I can draw a comparison to some other examples of crumbling stone. Again, something that happened to it after the stone was cut. There are basalt blocks on sites like Abu Sir that were once cased in limestone, and that is now crumbling. Perhaps what we're seeing here now is a hint to some hidden and lost but original functional purpose for this area of the site. Karnak Temple also displays some of the most interesting evidence for stone cutting and machining that you can find anywhere in Egypt. If you've seen my videos on these topics before, you'll know that there's a real problem with trying to explain the signatures in the stone with the tools and techniques that we know the dynastic Egyptians used. These are generally limited to pounding stones, flint or other hard stone chisels, and grinding techniques that use sand with copper, stone, or maybe even horn implements. With these tools alone, we're expected to believe that the mighty and perfectly shaped hard stone architecture and artifacts of places like Karnak and the Old Kingdom were formed. There are, however, a few spots at Karnak that display tool marks that absolutely cannot be explained via any of these primitive methods. On a section of an obelisk, again in the granitic core of the site, we can find several narrow overcuts. What's more, these overcuts begin shallow, they get deeper, and then they become shallow again, a clear indication for a powerful circular tool being used to cut into the granite. These tools were probably used as part of removing more stone above the level of the surface that we currently see, and we're just seeing the signature for the very end or the very tip of the tool, after most of the stone that it cut through was removed. At the lower end of this cut, there's also evidence for a reset of the tool. Perhaps it was slightly offline or off-center, and then it was reset. But in any case, this looks like something very powerful that was removing stone rapidly, and it left a slight overcut. More overcuts can be found in the white calcite of the so-called chapels that have been reconstructed near the entrance to Karnak Temple. Looking into the corners here gives us a clue as to the nature of the powerful tools that must have been used to give these blocks their shape, perhaps running a little too deeply into the material. Other overcuts also demonstrate that again these were most likely circular saws as they fit that profile. They start shallower, they get deeper, and then they become shallower again. Although in some places parts of these cuts are inaccessible due to the addition of modern concrete as part of the reconstruction effort. White calcite, like that used in these chapels, is one of the main stone types
Yeah,
that was
honestly,
used
maybe.
by the megalithic builders, along with granite, basalt, and limestone.
I think
Calcite is
to
sourced from ancient,
outright
and when I say ancient,
claim that they
millions of
didn't,
years ago, natural springs. In
with
order to get
certainty,
white calcite,
I don't think you
have
can
to
claim
quarry
that.
down to the very center or the source of the ancient spring. As the further out you go, the more impurities end up in the stone, and that results in things like yellow or brown calcite.
Calcite is the one that is coming from the core of the spring or from the source. Yeah. And we love to follow this understanding because it's the same case also with other types of stones like granite and the quartzite. They also have chosen the most pure and the best quality of the stone, the most pure quality of the stone.
Wherever the source was, the ancient builders must have been able to locate quite a lot of it, as white calcite, or alabaster, is used in large amounts on Old Kingdom sites. 60 to 70 tons of machined calcite was removed from the tunnels and galleries beneath the step pyramid of Joseph at Saqqara and then bulldozed into a berm in modern times. In other locations at Saqqara, we can find machined calcite used in the mysterious channel blocks that typically run beneath the established floor tiles at a lot of the Old Kingdom sites. There's also large blocks of white calcite found at Gyges. There's one here up at the end of the causeway in the mortuary temple complex, and there's actually megalithic building blocks made of it that are found inside the Valley Temple. White calcite also makes up the floor of the Valley Temple. So wherever you see the combination of granite, limestone, basalt and calcite, it often coincides with precise megalithic stonework and with the oldest of sites. I have a suspicion that this particular combination of stones was done because it has some sort of functional purpose, and it's perhaps one that resulted in the odd crumbling effect that we can see in a few places. I've done some, let's say, limited testing of the properties of these stones in the past, and I've covered that in a video, but I think this is a field of research that goes much deeper. If you're interested in these topics, I can recommend buying Chris Dunn's new book, Gyges, The Tesla Connection, when it comes out in early 2024. I've been lucky enough to read an advanced copy as I'm writing an endorsement for it, and I can safely say that it advances the subject of stone functionality to whole new levels. It's amazing work with breathtaking conclusions. The Skirps' heads are going to spin after this comes out, and I really do look forward to it. I couldn't show you Karnak without highlighting my favourite example of advanced machining here, and for this we once again return to the granite core structure of the site. In a large block of quarried and split granite, you can find one of the largest tube drill holes I've ever seen in Egypt. It's a monster, around 9 inches in diameter, and made into very hard stone. As with so many other examples of holes from tubular drills, the block has been split down the axis of the hole. I'm convinced that the people who were quarrying these ancient sites for granite pieces would look for these holes, and then using the wedge and chisel approach try to split the block along the axis of the drill hole. This technique obviously works, as you can find examples of split tube drill holes on many other sites like Gyges or Saqqara. The sheer size of this tubular drill belies the claim that this was made by some sort of grinding technique with a copper tube and sand. While that grinding method certainly was used to create smaller holes, I'm extremely skeptical that it's possible to achieve holes of this diameter in that manner. Consider the grinding hypothesis for a hole of this diameter. Starting the hole is a huge problem. Even in Mark Lehner and Dennis Stock's experiment that they did for his TV documentary, they had to use a power tool to get these circular holes started in the granite so that the copper tube could be seated in order to begin grinding, although they certainly don't show you that part in the film. How do you suppose you could ever start a 9-inch diameter hole into rose granite? By rubbing on it with sand? I guess you could chisel it in, or you could inset the hole somehow, but we really don't see any evidence for any of that here, and it's not an area that's ever been addressed by experimentalists, and it remains an open question. Although this hole is weathered and worn, you can still feel the grooves and striations on the walls, and that's another indicator that it was likely not made by grinding with a powder or sand. That grinding method leaves a polished surface with, if any, only very fine and barely perceptible horizontal scratches. This has been demonstrated by Chris Dunn's experiments, by Dennis Stock's experiments, and by the skeptics' own attempts to debunk Flinders Petrie's claims of a spiral groove. Speaking of that, I've covered the mystery of ancient tube drills in detail in my video on the topic, which is linked below in the description. And if you've seen that video, you'll know that it's not really the size of tube drills that presents a problem for this grinding hypothesis. It's the signature spiral groove that's left behind in the stone. The only piece that's ever been analysed in detail is Flinders Petrie's core number 7 that's housed in the Petrie Museum in London. Petrie first noticed the spiral groove on the core when he found it, and it indicates a remarkable penetration rate into the stone. His findings were conclusively validated by Christopher Dunn and by the Petrie Museum itself, with hands-on experiments and geometric analysis of a latex moulding that was made of the core. Not for nothing, but these finds were further confirmed by several other people who arranged research appointments with core number 7. Chris Dunn's findings seem to have been a very bitter pill to swallow for some skeptics, and I've seen some frankly ridiculous analysis of core number 7 trying to undermine them. These debunking attempts are frankly not credible. Not just my opinion, but that of several manufacturing engineers that I've spoken to about it. As far as I'm concerned, the case on core number 7 is closed. It's a spiral groove, and you can't obfuscate or bluster your way around the tests that have been done on the actual artifact. They're repeatable, they've been verified, and no matter how much you modify and put pretty colours on photographs, there's no getting around the geometry shown by the latex moulding. That said, I've always wanted to expand the scope of our knowledge in this area, as ultimately we've only ever really examined the one single drill core in any detail. I'm happy to say that some progress has been made here. On a recent trip to Egypt, we did manage to create several high-resolution photogrammetric scans of drill holes that will be analysed. And many thanks to the person who put these together. She knows who she is. These scans of drill holes might reveal some supporting evidence to Flinders Petrie's work. At least to the eye, they certainly contain deep grooves. But time and analysis will tell. Although I was in England in July 2023 and I was hoping to see Petrie's core number 7, unfortunately the Petrie Museum was closed for renovations. But a few of us are making plans to go back to England and hope to use a modern structured light scanner to create detailed scans of several artifacts that are housed there, including vases and also Petrie's core number 7, but also several other drill cores in their collection which, at least to the eye, seem to display similar spiral groove markings to core number 7. So, buckle up, Skirps, it's going to be a fun ride. If you haven't heard the term before, Skirp is our pet name for some of the skeptics of this work. The same people who can't seem to offer up anything more than weak cries of provenance or fake or sacred geometry is woo when it comes to responding to the truly remarkable findings of our recent pre-dynastic vase scan project. I'd advise said Skirps to get a good night's sleep and to prepare for some more angst, because we've been working hard on scanning several more vases in the meantime, and those scans are revealing very similar results to our first scan, and we fully intend to utilise this technique on other ancient artefacts like drill cores in order to expand our knowledge base of the past. Returning to the drill hole at Karnak, there are a couple features here that are worth noting. Firstly, we can see just how thin the tip of the actual tool was, as it left a slight overrun in the stone after the core was removed. Whatever material it was that made this hole, it certainly wasn't copper. Any experiments or even hypotheses involving copper grinding bars or grinding tubes has them, by necessity, quite thick, both because the bar or the tube needs surface area to do the grinding, as it's the sand or the cutting medium that's doing the actual cutting, and because the copper wears away at a similar rate to the stone. So when you see very thin overcuts, only a couple of millimeters thick in this case, it certainly wasn't a copper grinding tube that did this. If you tried to use a very thin copper tool, it would just bend, or it would wear away without any perceptible effect to the granite. It presents a real problem for the mainstream explanation of grinding with copper tools when it comes to the evidence for very thin overcuts, kerfs, or thin signatures. Copper won't cut granite on its own. It needs a medium like quartz sand, and it needs surface area to do that, and it needs mass to deal with the fact that the copper of the tool wears away as much as the stone does. I've seen very thin overcuts in tube drills at places like Abu Sir. I showed you some very thin overcuts into granite earlier. I've also observed very thin overcuts as well as thin kerfs on circular saw marks at Abu Sir that I've talked about before, made into basalt. Another feature of the Karnak drill hole is the carved circular groove with straight intersections around the top of the hole. Considering this stone block was originally whole and not split in half, this would have been an extremely difficult cut to make into the granite. I do think it might give a clue, however, as to a possible purpose for the hole, which is a question that I've seen often in comments. What were these drill holes for? In this case, it might have been a pivot point for an enormous set of doors, with the straight cuts acting as something of a locking position that a mechanism on the door pin could fall into, locking the door at that angle. That idea would necessitate the existence of other holes of similar sizes, but I haven't been able to find them. There are other grooved or striated tube drill holes found at Karnak, some with also very thin overcuts, and some that are in a more complete state. Here's one that's been made into a granite block in the core of the site, and there is another one found on a granite block near the Tefnut statue. There is other evidence for very large tube drill holes being employed. I've seen that in a couple of artifacts in the Cairo Museum, and in this case it looks like they were made into basalt. I've not been able to find this particular example since one of my earliest trips to the museum. I can only hope that it will actually be on display somewhere, perhaps in the new Grand Egyptian Museum, which I hope to visit on my next trip to the Eternal Land. Of course, some of the main attractions at both Karnak and Luxor are the epic single-piece granite statues. Immense and regal, they stare down at you as if daring you, a mere mortal, to explain their presence and origin. As mighty as these standing statues at Karnak and Luxor are, and some of these would be in the 300 to 400 ton range, there's evidence for far larger single-piece statues to be found on these sites. Here, in the boneyard of broken stones at Karnak, we can find part of a chest and neck from a gigantic statue. How was this immense block transported and carved? In another area of the boneyard, workers have been reassembling the pieces for another giant statue, this time made from a single piece of composite quartzite. Originally, just a hand was on display. Now it's been assembled into most of an arm and shoulder. And remarkably, given that the arm is straight, this was very likely to have been a standing statue rather than one of a figure seated. The quarry for the quartzite is not specifically known, but it certainly wasn't Aswan. And again, we're faced with the mother of all logistical issues when it comes to quarrying and transporting the giant block used for this statue, which likely would have easily exceeded 1,000 tons. A close examination of the features of the hand also reveals some interesting aspects. Note the fine work and carving of the thumbnail, obviously an original feature, and then compare it to the relatively crude inscription of the cartouche that's been made into the end of the scroll that the hand is holding. To me, this is obviously the work of primitive hand chisels.
Now, as a stone carver, and this is quartzite, conglomerate quartzite, as you can see the flints in it. So it's between 7 and 8.5 on the Morse scale. As a stone carver, I can notice things like the details that is around the cuticle here. It's amazing. It seems smooth. And it's as close as the small details that we find in the inscriptions here that dates and relates the statue. The question that I will always ask as a stone carver, why they didn't use the same tools and polishing that we use here to finish the work around the inscriptions here if they both were made at the same. Some academics can say that the inscriptions was done by a different person than the carver. I can agree with that, no problem. Still, these two stone workers must have similar tools. Like at least I will be very careful with the inscriptions, as good as the detail.
So it's quite a stretch to say that the stonemasons who inscribed the glyph on the scroll had access to the same tools as the stonemasons who made the original artifact. Some people will say, well, it was a different person who did the writing, as if it was somehow the scribe's job to carve stone.
My biceps?
Consider,
Yeah, thanks, bro.
Imagine you're
No, I'm
very
just
good
kidding.
at calligraphy or at drawing. Do you really think those skills translate to
Yeah, it's a
carving
massive
immensely
statue.
hard stone? If you think it does, then please, by all means, try it. What actually happens is that the scribe or the artist will come and paint or draw the glyphs onto the stone, and then it's the stonemason's job to carve them. If this was all done at the same time, then it would be the same stonemason, with presumably the same tools as those that were used to carve the artifact itself. How then can we explain the obvious difference in quality between the carving of the artifacts and the work of the writing? You can't, unless you open your mind to the possibility of longer timelines, different tools, and different technologies being used. What's more, in this case of this large statue at Karnak, quartzite can be considered even harder to work than granite, as it contains nodules of flint, which is typically the stone that's used to carve granite. You can see them here in pieces of this statue, yet running your hand over the smooth surface of the stone, there's no perceivable difference in finish. Clearly, whatever tool shaped the rock had no difficulty in working with flint, and it's quite amazing. I find it hard to convey the majesty of what these immense statues must have looked like in their original condition. And we know that there were many of them, not just at Karnak or in the Luxor region, but as far north as Tanis, some 1,000 miles away in the Delta. I've explored this topic in detail in my video on the gigantic single-piece granite statues of Egypt. The link to that is below. When I think about the millennia of time that these artifacts have stood silent, perhaps broken, yet still daunting, I'm reminded of Percy Shelley's poem, Ozymandias, telling of a desert explorer who, living in centuries past, came upon these mighty ruins. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. No thing besides remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." It's not just granite or quartzite that some of these statues are made from either. At Karnak, there is a broken statue made from dolerite. You might recognize the name of this stone. I've certainly said it plenty of times before, as this is the material the infamous pounding stones are made from.
This is how they made them, apparently.
Watch out, you'll break it.
The tools said to have been used to dig out the intractable granite of the famous Aswan quarry. The only tool needed, apparently, to shape and extract a 1,200-ton obelisk. One might wonder, what was used to carve the carver? This dolerite statue is very well made and finished. It reminds me of other Old Kingdom examples, like the famous Khafre enthroned in the Cairo Museum, which is made from diorite, another stone that is harder than granite. Perhaps this dolerite statue has been on this site for far longer than we think, but I guess if Ramses had his name carved into it, he must have had it made, right? Case closed, I guess, and we can just ignore all of these pesky technological issues. Speaking of pesky technological issues, in some of my earlier videos, I've covered the aspects of precision and symmetry that are found on some of these ancient Egyptian statues, as well as the evidence for multiple names being inscribed on them, or the evidence for glyphs being carved over pre-existing features. So do check out those videos if you haven't seen them. Although there's been a lot of renovation work that's happened here, for example, the great head, the Ramses head that Chris Dunn examined in his book, the same one that I took a look at in 2015, was once on the ground in front of the Luxor temple. It's since been restored to the top of a reformed statue. Despite all of this reconstruction work, there are still a few very interesting aspects that can be seen at eye level. One such example is this hedjet, or this crown, here at Luxor. This is also a class of artifacts that I've examined in previous videos. If you can, and this is without getting a whistle blown at you, run your hand over the perfectly finished surface of the stone. It's utterly remarkable. There is no perceivable deviation or imperfection. It's a true masterpiece of ancient engineering. There are a couple of these hedjets to be seen in the main courtyard at Luxor, and here's another one that Yusuf and I always like to show people. So, in order to try and bring this video to a conclusion, let me illustrate something that I've noticed at Luxor Temple over time. In the corner of the courtyard that contains several large standing statues, you might notice something that looks just a little bit off. These statues are surrounded by the typical sandstone columns made from stacked blocks, and it's certainly dynastic work. But look closely, the spacing between the columns around a couple of these statues looks just a little off, and it certainly is. The statue isn't centered between the columns. Or is it the case that the columns were not spaced evenly around the statues? The same thing can be observed at another statue. It's off-center between the sandstone columns. Consider the possibility that some of these artifacts, perhaps the statues, were in fact older, as we most certainly know some of them were. After all, even Ramses II was recycling the single-piece granite columns on this site, perhaps because he lacked the ability to make them. Could this sandstone infrastructure have been built up around the existing statues and columns? I don't see any reason to rule out this possibility. I think it's likely that the great works of the New Kingdom and Ramses were done to encompass, claim, perhaps even to restore a far older structure. Ultimately, I think this is the takeaway from these huge and ancient sites. As old as they are, and having been worked on over thousands of years in the Middle and New Kingdoms, in their granite cores and in their lower layers, there's a similarity and connection to the type of mysterious megalithic architecture found on Old Kingdom sites, and a shared technological conundrum with logistical challenges, machining marks, and precise stonework. None of that, however, takes anything away from the incredible achievements made here in later periods by the powerful kings and queens of the Middle and New Kingdoms. The soaring heights of the hypostyle halls, intricate artwork and colour, and sheer scope of the work that was done thousands of years ago by our ancestors simply takes your breath away. None of it should be missed should you ever find yourself visiting the fascinating ancient treasure trove of Luxor. Our knowledge of many of the artifacts and aspects of these remarkable sites would, I think, benefit from future work and analysis using modern techniques like 3D scanning and modelling in order to deepen our understanding of their creation. Even if the results of such investigation present challenging dilemmas to our current understanding of the history of human civilization, I think that any open-minded archaeologist, researcher, or interested person should be in favour of using all of our capabilities to learn more about these sites, no matter where the evidence leads. Thanks for watching.
Conventional archaeologists who dismiss the possibility of highly advanced civilizations in the remote past insist that they were built solely with the use of primitive tools and brute force. Some of the structures, or parts of them, could have been built in this way. However, a number of engineers have stated that some features would be difficult, if not impossible, to duplicate today, even using the most advanced technology. The sheer weight and size of some of the stone blocks have prompted several researchers to wonder whether the ancient builders had mastered some form of levitation technology. Behind each structure you're about to see, from Japan to Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of mystery and intrigue that has puzzled even the best scientists. Asuka is a village nestled among the hills of the Nara prefecture of Kansai, Japan. The area is known for its many Buddhist temples, shrines, and statuary, but there are unusually shaped granite stones and stone-carved figures that still defy explanation. Apart from the Shimuzen Seki, a garden fixture carved to suggest Mount Sumeru of Buddhist mythology, or the male-female stone carving which likewise was designed as a fountain, the purposes originally associated with the other worked stones, bearing such names as Masuda no Iwafune, Sakafune Ishi, Kame Ishi, Miroku Ishi, Nimen Seki, etc., is unknown and does not fit with Buddhist-style sculpture or construction. They have been, for the most part, ignored by academics. Let's focus on the largest of those monuments. It's known as Masuda no Iwafune, which is said to mean Rock Ship of Masuda. The monument is 11 meters long, 8 meters wide, and 4.7 meters high, and weighs approximately 1,000 tons, carved from a single piece of granite. The upper surface is flat with a shallow trough and 2 square holes. At the base of the stone, there are protruding notches that are believed to be related to the process used by the builders to flatten the sides of the rock. It sits atop the steep incline of a hill near Okadera Station. Some believe the shape and contour of the rock is very compelling evidence for past alien encounters. In fact, most ancient astronaut researchers in the area believe Masuda no Afune is a replica of a godlike vehicle. Other researchers have speculated that it could be a piece of evidence that shows signs of an advanced technology in the past because of the skill involved in making it. Obviously, it's an incredibly advanced construction for its time. Another remarkable fact is that the granite rock from which the megaliths were created is incredibly hard. Even with modern equipment, it's very difficult to even apply a scratch to the surface. Locals believe in the magical powers of megaliths and try to avoid them, and many more will not touch the stones. Today, these stones still represent one of the greatest archaeological puzzles of Japan, because no archaeologist can state with certainty how old the Masuda no Wafune really is, or what its original function might have been. There are many more of these enigmatic features of ancient Japan that are, as of now, lost to the pages of history. Seiwai is an archaeological site 47 kilometers east of the city of Abancay, about 3 hours away from the city of Cusco, in the province of Abancay, in the region of Apurimac in Peru. To some historians, the site is regarded as a center of religious worship for Inca people. But beyond the ruins of the Inca temple are mysterious automobile-sized stones, which have clearly been shaped with an unknown technology. Whoever created the massive stones is another massive mystery. Although it's thought that the place was an Inca sanctuary, archaeologists are not sure the ancient Incans were the constructors. The stone is made of andesite, which is as hard as granite, and the Inca had at best bronze tools or meteorite iron hammers. This is why much doubt has been cast on the origins of the monuments and their archaeological site of Seiwai. This intricate stone block is adorned with more than 200 zoomorphic and geometric figures, which together compose something like a 3D relief. The entire rock itself is even formed in the shape of a feline head. It's said to have been transported to the hill since it's not a natural outcrop. Some carvings represent geographical figures and human constructions, while making use of certain shapes natural to the rock formation. The top of the stone is completely resurfaced with complex designs with many resembling streets, stairways, channels, and buildings. Perhaps the stone carving represents a map of a lost city, or, as some theories suggest, it may be a depiction of the universe itself. Researcher Dr. Arlen Andrews Sr. believes the monolith was used as a scale model to design, develop, test, and document the water flow for public water projects, and to teach ancient engineers and technicians the concepts and practices required. While the precise meaning of this stone remains unsolved, the monolith is part of the material culture of the Incan people, and as such helps archaeologists piece together how and why they lived this way. Understanding the Incan culture from an archaeological perspective helps archaeologists apply this knowledge to similar civilizations and find links between ancient cultures. In any case, however, the Say White monolith remains an intriguing mystery, and no doubt people will continue to speculate about it from its creators to its function for years to come. Intihuatana stone is a sacred ritual stone for the Incas, which has four sides considered as the four cardinal points: north, south, east, and west. The most famous Intihuatana stone is located at the archaeological site of Machu Picchu, which is located on top of the sacred mountain. This is a simple wonder reflecting the perfection of ancient technology. This wonderful sculpture, to put it one way, had of course more functions than being a beautiful decorative piece, which it surely is. The stone's name is translated into English as the hitching post of the sun, because the Incas believed that the stone can hold the sun in its place along its annual path in the sky. The sun almost stands at the pillars at midday on March 21st and September 21st, when the equinoxes occur. Daytime equals nighttime. Then no shadow is cast at all. The monolithic structure, carved in gray granite, up to 2 meters high and 2 meters in diameter. Its base does not have a defined shape, but at the top stands out an upright stone column. In addition, it features a granite block resembling a bench. However, who actually made this is again open to question. Brienne Forster states, "The lack of tool marks on the surfaces may indicate that the work done to make these enigmas was long before Inca times, possibly by a culture called the Hair House or Viracochas. Viracocha is the name or title in the Quechua language of the Inca creator god at the time of the Spanish conquest of Peru in the 16th century. According to Inca beliefs, Viracocha made earth and sky, then fashioned from stone a race of giants. Displeased with them, he turned some giants back into stone and destroyed the rest in a flood. It's often said that the Intihuatana stone serves as a portal to another world. These stones were extremely sacred to the Incas. Peruvian shamans claimed, and still claim, that if a sensitive person touches their forehead to the stone, it would open their vision to the spirit world. During their conquest, the Spaniards specifically sought out and destroyed many Intihuatana stones. The Incans believed that when an Intihuatana stone was broken, the deities pertaining to that sacred spot would die. Many mysteries are written around the stone. They tie the sun because if the sun goes out, his life will be finished, and the sun brings to life all creatures, is the light of the life. Back to Japan now. 100 kilometers west of Asuka Park, near Takasago, there is mysterious object standing beside the rock massif. Ishi no Hoden is a monolith, semi-finished product. In other words, a block that's remained in place since its production and which has clear signs that it has not yet been fully completed. It's estimated to be at least 1,500 years old. The temple is built precisely near the megalith because it's believed holy and people have venerated it since ancient times. The official version is that the rock was meant to be a tomb, but there's no scientific information as to who built it nor what its true purpose is. The mysterious cube monument is dug out of the surrounding rock, similar to the rock churches in Ethiopia. The makers skillfully position the stone to appear as if it's actually hovering above the pool of water it stands in, with the overall structure being situated in an old quarry. It's known as one of the greatest enigmas of Japan's ancient history, and is now worshipped as the god of a Shiko Jinja Shinto shrine. Although the structure of the top is concealed by pine trees, it's thought that there may be two holes like Masada no Iwafune and Kengo Shizuka Kofun. Some say that it's supposed to show a sky ship with a long-gone people coming down from heaven. The stone is 5.6 meters high, 6.5 meters wide, and 7.5 meters deep, with a weight of 500 tons. This makes the stone larger than any of the stones used in the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest of which was 80 tons, while the typical large base stones of that pyramid were 6 to 10 tons. There are no regular traces or drills or chisels on Ishi no Hoden. This surface character again raises questions about a certain type of mechanical tool that does not spoil, but simply crushes or grinds the material. Even seeing the difference between the surfaces of Masudu Iwafune and Ishi no Hoden, it's quite possible that the same tool was used when machining both objects. The stone monument was built from hyalocastite stone, which is a volcanic rock consisting of glassy large pieces contained in a fine-grained matrix dominated by glassy shards or smaller pieces. Something like this might lead us to speculate on a melting process with high technologies. Because of the enormous size alone, it's safe to assume that it was built by a technologically developed civilization, and with its overwhelming presence and its mystique, it continues to fascinate people even today. There are many strange sites in the Arabian Peninsula that might puzzle even the most well-traveled researcher. One of them is Al Nasla Rock Formation. This rock is split through the middle by a clean and straight crack, which looks almost as if the rock was sliced with a laser. It's located in Tema Oasis, Saudi Arabia.
Serious, Baron? Yo, how are you, bro? How's everything, man? 20 months, so insane.
Which are possibly dating from the 6th
that's
century
so cool.
BCE.
Thank you, man.
At
Thanks
the
so
Oasis.
much. That helps so much.
They show Al Nasla
And you don't
was
get
a
to see the
major
ads.
trade route in antiquity, and was once the dwelling place of a Babylonian king, Nabonidus. It's referenced in both Assyrian and biblical sources as a trade
Journey, what a journey these last 28 months have been. Holy shit, and before, prior, man.
Just
Right, it took me fucking a year and a half to get affiliate.
exploring the unknown, and you come across a
appreciate that,
massive
man.
standing stone split in
Oh, yeah,
half
dude.
by a perfect line. What would be the first thing that jumps to
Everything's
your
good,
mind?
that's good, man.
The rock was discovered in 1833 by Charles.
This is a video of the world's
and it's been at the
biggest
heart of many
megaliths,
theories and
rock,
controversies
mysteries.
since then. There have been numerous speculations to ascertain the
Insane.
reason and the method of the cut. However, the mystery of this megalith
you're good,
is
dude.
still as shrouded
I'm
as it
working
was
off those
at
chili
the time
cheese
of its
dogs, man.
discovery. One of the vertical fields is flat.
I need to go to
almost like
Philly,
it's
get a
been
Philly
cut by a
cheesesteak, man.
modern device. Could it have
That'd be
been
dope.
worked on at
That'd be a great
some
road
point
trip.
with some sort of precise ancient tool? Taking a closer look at this stone of Al Nasla,
Yo.
you cannot help but wonder
Know your
what
role.
its true purpose
Shut
was.
your damn mouth.
Is the split in the rock really a result of the forces
We don't
of
want no
nature, as some
jabronis up in
experts
here with these
suggest?
rock
Or
splitting,
is it possible
candy
that
ass
just as
rootin'
there are
tootin'
many other ancient
jabronis?
places on Earth, dating back thousands of years, featuring precision cuts, this stone
I've been
too
wanting a
was
Philly
crafted by
cheesesteak
an
recently.
unknown technology. Uniquely, in each of the
If
lower
you
parts of the
smell
Al Nasla stone, it looks like a buffer is formed
the
by
Philly
rocks that are much smaller or
cheesesteak.
similar to a shock absorber.
That'd be insane,
which
man.
prevents it
I've never
from
had
touching
one,
the
man.
ground.
I've never
This
had an
has made
official one.
archaeologists shake
I've never
their
been to
heads in
Philadelphia ever.
puzzlement, and many
I've been to
continue
Baltimore, I've been
try
to
solve the
Washington, I've been
mystery this
to
day. Today, this part
Boston,
of the
I've been to
Saudi
New
Arabian
York.
desert is still under investigation for
Never
archaeological
Philadelphia.
remains. Of
Been in
course,
New Jersey?
the last question we should ask is,
Like, I've been
how long
everywhere
the
but
rocks
Philadelphia.
were
It's
made by
wild.
Buddhists.
I've been to fucking Pittsburgh
Before the advent of
Cleveland?
Islam, Afghanistan was an important center of Buddhist teaching.
Cincinnati,
To find remnants of this Buddhist past,
Rochester,
one has to search extremely thoroughly. The
Buffalo.
once rich excavation sites have turned to rubble after decades of neglect. One of these remnants and lesser-known
Adirondacks, Albany,
curiosities of Afghanistan
the
is
Baseball
the
Hall of Fame,
Takht-e-Rustam
Lake
monument
Placid.
in Samangan province between Mazar-e-Sharif and Kunduz in the north.
Yo, thanks for the
This stupa was named after Rustam III, the Persian ruler of the Bavan dynasty. Unlike others, this stupa has not been mounted above ground, but it's been carved into the ground in a style that, again, resembles the monolithic churches of Ethiopia. The dome-shaped structure of the highly polished limestone, 8 meters high and 28 meters across, is encircled by a 2-meter wide passageway at its foot, which was used by pilgrims for circumambulation.
Yeah, man, I've been to
Historicity of the town is dated
Chicago,
to the
fucking
Persian
Arizona,
dynasty reign during the
Nevada,
4th
San
and 5th
Francisco.
centuries.
I haven't been to
It
Memphis.
represents the earliest link
I haven't
to the
been to
evolution of
Philadelphia.
Buddhist architecture
I
in
haven't been to
Afghanistan.
New Orleans.
The
And
monastery
I haven't
of
been
the
to
major
Atlanta.
Buddhist tradition,
I think I gotta go
the
on this
Theravada
road trip to the
Buddhism,
south. I
has
honestly
5
think that would be such a.
Two are sanctuaries and one
I
is
mean, I
a
might get
domed
robbed,
ceiling
but
with an intricate lotus leaf
that'd be such a great
beautification.
trip. Down
There
to New
are
Orleans?
several
Holy
caves
shit.
at the base of the stupa. Above one of the caves, there's a square building
Gras?
with 2 conference
I might
halls.
go for Mardi Gras this
One
year.
is
honestly. I might
22 meters square, and the other is circular. In one of these caves, archaeological excavations have revealed a cache of Ghaznavid coins. One must ask, how could Buddhists have built this strange and mysterious building? But if you do, you probably won't find an answer. There are very few records of how this place was constructed or how long it took to make. Historians have proposed 2 possible reasons why the stupa has been carved in the ground instead of being built above the ground. One explanation is that it could have been done for the purpose of camouflage to protect the monastery from invaders. Another much more mundane explanation states that it's simply been done to escape the excessive hot and cold climate extremes of Afghanistan. Some ancient astronaut researchers suggest that it can have connection to mysterious flying ships that visited Earth 6,000 years ago, according to ancient Vedic texts. They say stupas design-wise are much like flying ships, vimanas, seen around the world. Is it possible that an ancient flying machine, reportedly discovered in a cave in Afghanistan in 2012, could be one of these ancient flying vehicles? Quirigua is a remarkable place. It's located in the southeastern border of the Maya lowlands in Guatemala. What makes this place remarkable is the stelae and zoomorphs discovered by explorers John Lloyd Stevens and Frederick Catherwood, who were the first to record and document the site in 1840. These intricate works of stone are the latest and best preserved from the Mayan world. Originally, Quirigua was under the rule of the dynasty of the city of Copan, now Honduras. But in 738 AD, the Quirigua dynasty managed to become independent and even subjugate the Copan dynasty. And that's when the city reached its peak. Most of the monumental constructions and the Acropolis, as well as the stelae, were erected during the following 60 years of reign of the new Quirigua dynasty, a dynasty that dominated the region of the Copan River and the Matagua River. These monoliths were carved out of sandstone by Mayan stonemasons who had no access to metal tools, which is an amazing feat. It's even more so when one considers the intricate designs that cover them. Zoomorph P is the largest of the Zoomorpho at Quirigua, and according to some, it's the greatest Mesoamerican monument ever discovered. Weighing over 20 tons, it stands 2 meters tall, measures 3.5 meters wide, and 3 meters long. It provides a surface area of about 402 meters, or 1,314 feet, and every square centimeter is engraved with information. You'll see Zoomorph P marries 2 key principles. Firstly, the king rests in the jaws of a mythical beast. Secondly, he holds the mannequin scepter and shield, which is shown on many of the stelae. One interpretation of this scene is that it's meant to be a reenactment of the creation of man. Explorer Maudsley nicknamed it the Great Turtle. It weighs around 20 tons. The design of this zoomorph is incredibly intricate, and the whole monument is covered with skillfully executed sculpture. It's located in the Ball Court Plaza, just south of the Ball Court. Zoomorph P is accompanied by an altar depicting an unidentified deity leaping from a split in the earth. A hieroglyph text on the zoomorph describes the founding of Quirigua under the supervision of the King of Copan. Traces of red pigment have been found on this monument, suggesting that it was originally painted red. John Lloyd Stevens and Frederick Catherwood's books on Quirigua makes for some fascinating reading. After they discovered the place, they were followed by Alfred Maudsley in the 1880s and 90s, who documented the site through his excellent photographic methods. Sylvanus Morley started systematic excavations in the early 1900s. Excavation and consolidation continued in the 1970s and 80s. Pumapunku is part of a wider temple complex found in the ancient city of Tiahuanacu in western Bolivia. Both are viewed as the most mysterious archaeological sites in all of South America. Situated 3,800 meters above sea level, Tiahuanacu predates the ancient Inca civilization of pre-Columbian South America. There's no written record of the ancient city prior to Inca settlement, with the Incas believing to be a holy site where their deity of creation, Viracocha, started life. With the various ethnicities of human being created here before moving out into the wider world. Pumapunku, the door of the Puma, is one of many examples of the incredible masonry work found throughout Tiahuanacu. It and many other structures were created with startling precision that predates the technology and methods available at the time, with doorways, stone blocks, smoothly drilled holes, an irrigation system, and other complex examples of stonework found throughout the site. The blocks used to create perfectly interlocked and looked like they were manufactured using modern machinery. A huge stone terrace and walls
again, I
would
swear, I
feature massive
promise.
blocks
You know, I'm
that
gonna,
interlock with each other
when I
with
feel
the
healthy,
finest
when I
precision.
am healthy,
They
I
form
play
load-bearing
better for
joints,
them,
and no
I
mortar was
my
used
dudes
when
to
building
do
the
that.
site. The precision needed to make these cuts into huge stone blocks has given birth to many theories about the origins of Pumapunku and Tiahuanacu. Many theorize that an advanced ancient civilization predating the Incas were responsible and had technologies well beyond a civilization for a much later period. We know Incas didn't have the capabilities to pull off such feats of engineering. How could a civilization that predates them by hundreds of years do so? According to engineers, one of the largest single stones ever to be moved and put into building anywhere on Earth, about 400 tons, was transported to Tiahuanaco from a quarry over 200 miles away. This feat is more incredible when one realizes the route of transport was through a mountain range up to 15,000 feet. They've amazed countless travelers, such as the Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon, who observed that some of these stones are very worn and washed, and there are others so large that one wonders how human hands could have brought them to where they now stand. When one considers the work, I cannot understand or fathom what kind of instruments or tools were used to work them, for it's evident that before these huge stones were dressed and brought to perfection, they must have been much larger to have been left as we see them. I would say that I consider this the oldest antiquity in all of Peru. Other stones at Pumapunku contain inexplicable grooves and niches. Some researchers have speculated they may have used metal clamps. To create these clamps, the construction workers would have had to deploy a portable furnace to pour the molten liquid metal into the grooves. Any delay could solidify the metal, beating the purpose of melting it. Therefore, evidently, the constructors of Pumapunku Not only were well versed with the science of metal making, but also they were advanced enough that they could create a portable furnace device to achieve the technique of clamping. Here we see stone pillars with meticulously carved grooves in them. The precision and accuracy with which these grooves have been created is incredible given the time. What's more remarkable is that they show signs of tooling and machining. It's been speculated that only diamond-tipped tools could have cut through the unforgiving diorite. However, that subject also has much debate. How such massive stone blocks were carried to the site is a topic of debate, and whilst giant seems to be a wilder theory, it's certainly one that carries some weight when considering how the creators of this place managed to move these huge blocks. This would involve carrying stone blocks weighing several dozen tons, many miles, and up a steep mountain incline. The mainstream theory is that a labor force from the ancient settlers of Tiahuanaco completed the task, but what techniques they could have used remains hotly disputed given the complex route to the site. The largest stone blocks used in Pumapunku are around 7.8 meters long, 5 meters wide, and roughly a meter thick, with an average weight estimated to be 131 tons. The site is 2 miles above sea level. There's no evidence of the wheel in Tiahuanacan culture, and there are no trees in the area to use as rollers. The feat of moving the stones for 10 miles, let alone 90, would be an incredible achievement. Interestingly, the age of the site has also been hotly debated over the years. After its original discovery by explorer Arthur Poznański, the site was dated to around 15,000 BC. He based this finding on the astronomical alignment of the main temple, which acts as a sort of sundial based on the sun's positioning. During his time there, the sunrise didn't follow the alignment of the temple's cornerstone as expected, leading him to calculate that the sunrise would follow the proper alignment 17,000 years prior. However, modern radiocarbon dating places it as much more recent construction, sometime around AD 600, although many cite these findings as inaccurate and unreliable. Tiahuanaco seems to have faced a sudden, catastrophic end. In the layers of rock that date to the same time, now extinct species of plants and animals can be found mixed in with human skeletal remains. Everything seems to be jumbled together, as if a tidal wave or some other event caused major changes on the Earth's surface, including the life that inhabited it. This gives credence to the theory that a global flood, found throughout mythology, did occur. Ollantaytambo is a town found 72 kilometers from the city of Cusco, Peru, that is a prominent archaeological site with some incredible megalithic structures. Situated 2,792 meters above sea level, it's the starting point of the historical Sacred Valley, a prominent tourist route that leads to Peru's famous Inca archaeological sites, including Machu Picchu, Pisac, Chinchero, and Ollantaytambo itself. This ancient marvel of engineering is believed to have been built around 1440 AD by Inca Emperor Pachacuti. However, many researchers believe that this ancient site dates back much further in time than we can imagine. There are many noteworthy structures in Ollantaytambo, including the Temple Hill. Made from huge stone blocks that weigh some 50 tons, the heaviest are thought to weigh as much as 150 tons. They were placed with such precision using a cut and fit method that no mortar was needed, a common fixture of architecture in Peru. Modern technology can't even lift some of the stones, let alone position them such that a human hair cannot fit through. Clearly, the techniques used to produce these features has been lost to modern science. Yet it's evident of how advanced ancient peoples were. Soft stones could also explain the precision fit. The stones would settle by their own weight and the weight of the ones on top, thereby squeezing into any gaps. The protrusions could be formed by making marks in the support structure that would be necessary to prevent uncontrolled movement of the material at the outer face of the wall. Amazingly, The stones used for this megalithic structure are thought to be quarried from a mountaintop quarry about 7 miles from Ollantaytambo. This means that the stones would need to be lowered down a steep portion of the mountain or transported over River Canyon with near vertical rock walls. This method would then require the blocks to be lifted back up another portion of the mountain to the site of the town. Given the technological limitations of the time, a remarkable achievement if true. Advocates of such push and shove technique point out that the remains of a ramp do exist, leading up to the hillside, and that furthermore numerous stones, the so-called tired stones, which never made it to the top, can be seen lying at the foot of the ramp. Unfortunately, this evidence only explains the stones that did not get up to the ramp. It tells us nothing about the stones which we see at the top of the hill. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that the megalithic structures already existed in Inca times, and that the ramp and tired stones represent the efforts of the Incas to emulate what they saw. How is it possible that the massive stone walls display fascinating similarities to ancient walls found halfway around the globe in Egypt? Does this mean that ancient cultures shared the same building techniques? Does this mean that ancient cultures around the globe had access to some sort of advanced ancient technology that's been lost since then? The Wall of the Six Monoliths is the main highlight of the Temple Hill area, which is an unfinished building made from 6 massive stone blocks. It's one of the most iconic and baffling pieces of architecture yet to be discovered. Standing approximately 36 feet wide and 14 feet high, the wall is one of the great mysteries of the Andes. It consists of 6 massive andesite monoliths, which are curiously divided by small strips, which seem to serve little purpose other than to add a modern riveted steel effect to this ancient wall. The rocks are all masterfully crafted to leave not even a paper-thin crack between them. We can easily see where they were carved from the rock face on the other side of the valley. Several questions arise from even a cursory examination, though. The cut marks are perfectly square. You would think that the stone would be knocked out of the rock face and then squared. That's how modern stone cutters would do it. Not so here. It almost looks as if the rock was scraped off the mountain face. Secondly, the surface of the cuts is glassy smooth, not rough the way you'd expect sawn or chiseled surfaces to be. Also, why did they cut the rocks from a place that are sometimes up to 130 feet above the floor of the valley? It would be akin to taking an incredibly difficult job and making it 100 times harder just for the fun of it. There is one interesting theory, and that is levitation. Unfortunately, science has still not been able to figure out how to levitate large, heavier objects. Yet, history suggests the ancient civilizations might have already cracked this secret in their building of the pyramids and other megalithic monuments. Did they have some advanced form of sound levitation to move 1,000-ton stones? A task that present-day builders admit would be difficult even with the use of modern cranes. Another interesting find lay on the bottom from where these rocks were cut out of. We find strange but precise crisscross patterns. The pattern that we see appears to be a trace left by some kind of machinery that was left behind at the time these slabs were being removed. Possibly these marks could have been created by some kind of laser or saw machine. So yes, this could be one of the most clear pieces of evidence that the ancients did in fact use some sort of advanced technology at the time they were cutting, removing, and shaping these incredible rocks. There are also several unused stone blocks scattered around the area that show most of the Temple Hill Center was incomplete when the town was abandoned. Other blocks look to have been removed from the walls in the area too, suggesting that a major reconstruction project may have begun at some point. Further afield from the town are several storehouses built for the farmers working along the winding terraces that surround Ollantaytambo. There's also a road that the Incas built that connected Ollantaytambo to Machu Picchu and Pisac, which is used today for the many tourists trekking through Peru's most famous Inca sites. Is this evidence of an advanced, now lost worldwide civilization that spread throughout the world and allowed its mystery builders to cut with laser-like precision, intricately carve and transport massive rocks weighing over hundreds of tons in weight? Is this evidence of an ancient alien civilization that came to Earth many thousands of years ago and helped mankind evolve? Or is it simply the ingenuity of mankind? Ancient advanced stonework and extreme machining in ancient Egypt. The purpose in presenting the notion of ancient advanced extreme machining in ancient Egyptian culture is simple. They had such a sophisticated stone technology beyond our own. The evidence presented here will leave you absolutely baffled beyond belief. There are so many numerous examples, we can only hope the scientific process in uncovering the work of the engineering geniuses becomes enhanced. However, Egyptology is no fan of attributing any advanced skills to the ancient master masons. They still sell us this method to achieve advanced results, like this. The tides of injustice are slowly turning as global tourism and sophisticated cameras are commonplace now. We have hard evidence of pre-dynastic stone-turning possible lathe work, tubular drilling at advanced speeds, marks left behind by what can only be perceived as use of circular stone saws, mechanical methods of engraving lines in hard stones as far back as the 4th dynasty, ancient machining techniques comparable to today's CNC routing, except done in hard pink granites. The ancient Egypt masons shaped all kinds of stone with intricate mastery. They were adept with the use of a wide variety of manufacturing tools, various building stones, tube drills capable of hard material, straight cutting saws, circular cutting saws, lathes, and smoothing techniques for polishing. It's the marks left in the stone by these multitude of tools which are the reliable source of evidence of advanced extreme machining in the ancient world. There are no surviving examples of the tools utilized. There are no written or pictorial records discovered which mention or describe their use. After all, we barely do this today. Why should they in ancient times? There's serious debate about the nature of the tools and their advanced techniques in the historical framework. The marks left in stone are a beacon of curiosity and intrigue to engineers who work these materials today. Egyptology couldn't care less how they did anything unless they feel the need to show some guy pounding a rock and solve the enigmas of all Egyptian building work in an instant. Modern experts are baffled with their machining techniques, and it's these individuals we must listen to if we want to answer conclusively the key questions. What were the cutting tool tips made of? What was their abrasive? How were the tools manufactured? What machinery was used to control the cutting surface on the stone? How did they apply the tool pressure? Why were their tolerance standards of precision so high? Engineers and architects are completely puzzled and rigorously debate pointing to monuments and artifacts, though no scientific proof exists for any of their theories unless the tools are present. Look at an ocean cruiser. It doesn't take a sophisticated debate to know tools, industry, and manufacturing of a high level was used to create it. Why does Egyptology portray such ignorance on the issue then? Because the revelations bear directly on the developmental history and subsequent chronology of the pre-dynastic Egyptian cultures, followed by the early dynastic period. Ancient housewares discovered by Flinders Petrie show undeniable proof of being turned on a lathe. There are various examples in the Cairo Museum, the Petrie Museum in UCL London, and various other museums around the world. Some of the best examples of stoneware were discovered around the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. Petrie also discovered pieces of interesting stoneware on the Giza Plateau. There are incredible aspects about these vases, plates, and bowls that speak of highly advanced engineering techniques. They portray the distinctive tool marks belonging to lathe-manufactured items. This is easily visible in the center of the bowls or plates, where the angle of the cut changes rapidly. The stoneware in question is left with a very clean, narrow, and almost perfectly circular line made, a clear indication of the tip of the cutting tool. These stoneware masterpieces, comprising of dishes, platters, are some of the finest ever found, and they're right there from the earliest period of ancient Egyptian civilization. They're made from a variety of materials. Seemingly, the choice of material to be cut was irrelevant, as they went from soft alabaster all the way up the hardness scale to extremely hard granite. Working with alabaster is relatively easy, at least compared to granite. Alabaster can be worked with primitive abrasives and tools. The sophisticated workings in granite are an entirely different matter and indicate a level of skill we're not aware of today and can only be considered advanced technology. Flinders Petrie was quoted on this issue saying, "The lathe appears to have been as familiar an instrument in the 4th dynasty as it is in the modern workshops." Stonework as sophisticated as these examples are not found in any later era, leaving many to think the skill was lost or that they were heirlooms from a different epoch or culture. There's also the case of delicate vases being made of very brittle schist, somewhat like a flint. And yet they're polished, finished, and turned to flawless thin edges. An incredible feat of engineering and craftsmanship. Many bowls are turned and hollowed out with thin necks and have a symmetrical wall thickness without any noticeable errors. Let us not understate that these items were made by an ancient machinist. To produce this in clay would be outstanding. To see it in granite is simply incredible. There are many pieces turned out of granite, porphyry, or basalt, all fully hollowed with decorative narrow undercut openings. The most remarkable of these have long necks. The fact remains we cannot replicate these artifacts today with techniques, crafts, or machinery. But before we feel any ineptitude of craftsmanship, Egyptology comes to the rescue with copper chisels and stone pounders. The tri-lobed schist disc of Sabu is a complete mystery and masterpiece. Some 24 inches in diameter, bizarre structure with extremely thin pieces turned out of schist. The large plate has a central hub some 3 inches in diameter. The outside rim, which in 3 areas spaced evenly around the perimeter, is flared towards the central hub. If there was ever a case for advanced ancient stoneworking, this is it. It's made from a very fragile material called metasiltstone. Bending this material without fracturing it would be hard even for modern technology. According to some scientists, the Sabu disc raises important questions about our view of history. What was the purpose of this mysterious disc? Why on earth would ancient Egyptians create such an intricate object? 5,000 years ago, people were not supposed to possess the necessary tools to work material like this. Why would ancient Egyptians go to all this effort to create the disc if it didn't have a specific purpose? The Sabu disc is the subject of wild speculations as a result from everything involving rotating energy to acoustic knowledge. There were not just a few of these stoneware items. Apparently there were thousands discovered around the Step Pyramid. The Step Pyramid is considered the oldest stone pyramid in Egypt. Although Petrie found some fragments of similar bowls at Giza, the majority have been found at the Step Pyramid, at least in quantity. Many of them have inscribed, actually scratched onto them, the symbols of the very earliest kings of Egypt from the time before the pharaohs. The primitive skill of the inscriptions provokes many to think those were not made by the same craftsmen who created the bowls in the first place. Perhaps they were added later by those who acquired them as heirlooms. It's highly plausible. Who made these objects? Why? How? Where? And when? What happened to the master craftsmen? The advanced tubular drilling techniques. W.M. Flinders Petrie is by far an essential reading source on anything to do with tubular drilling in ancient Egypt. After all, he picked up the pieces, the drill cores, and the fragments that nobody else seen the value in. In 1883, he wrote the following words. These tubular drills vary in thickness from 1/4 inch to 5 inches in diameter, and from 1/30 to 1/5 inch thick. The smallest hole yet found in granite is 2-inch diameter. There is a still larger example, where a platform of limestone rock has been dressed down by cutting it away with tube drills about 18 inches in diameter. The circular grooves occasionally intersecting prove that it was done merely to remove the rock. Tube drilling was commonplace in Egypt, a wonderful pristine example of which is displayed in the Cairo Museum, with zero information or provenance. Clearly, the spiral grooves are visible. Not only are the spiral grooves of regular depth, but equally spaced all over the specimen. Where the cores overlap, the consistency is perfect. This can only be attained by jeweled points set in the drills, which was Petrie's conclusion over 100 years ago. The enigma has raged since then. The most famous example of tube drilling by the ancient builders is the sarcophagus in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. A tube drill mark was left on the top inside of the box with some extra polishing to cover it up. If you go to the king's chamber, you can still see it if you examine the box. Looking at the radius of the cut in the king's chamber box, less than 2 inches, it's rather obvious that in this one piece alone, the masons made thousands of holes several inches deep. The experts who did this had mastered completely the principles of drilling in any material, soft or hard, wood, stone, or metal, and could have drilled virtually any naturally occurring material on this planet. Things get interesting when we find holes drilled in granite, and we even have some of the drill core remnants. This can be seen in the overhead door lintels of the granite-lined Valley Temple near the Sphinx, and at Abu Gharaib. Most of the doorways in the temple still show evidence of tube drilling one way or another. Perhaps the holes were used to place long vertical rotating shafts on which the doors were hung, somewhat like hinges. There's a primitive version of tube drilling that can be achieved with a bamboo drill bit, a bow saw, and sand. However, achieving this method in granite is certainly not easy by any standards. Tube drilling is a highly specialized method that just wouldn't develop without the need for a large hole. These holes are the evidence of a highly advanced technology, and certainly not developed for just this one purpose, but for many easier purposes. Generations of development over many projects, over hundreds of years. When you get this far in the psychology of our ancient builders, you further realize none of this happened without mining and metallurgy. Bit manufacturing, generations of experience with grinding materials, rotational manufacturing techniques, the wheel and all that goes with it. What was the dedication or motivation for this developmental procedure? And is there an archaeological record in pre-dynastic and Old Kingdom Egypt pertaining to advanced ancient stone cutting techniques? Black basalt saw marks on the Giza Plateau and the King's Chamber. There are black basalt paving stones on the east side of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Most people walk over them, never realizing them, probably busy looking up at the Great Pyramid. These basalt pavers are irregular in thickness and often rounded on the bottom side. They were placed on top of blocks of limestone, which had previously been fitted to the underbelly bedrock. Amazingly, the basalt blocks were cut to level in situ after they'd been put in place on the ground. The edges are so crisp and parallel. The quality of this work indicates that the blade was held completely steady. Apparently, cutting basalt was not so slow and arduous that extra cuts like these would have been avoided, as being an unnecessary waste of time. There are several places where overcuts like these can be seen. They show no trace of the wobbling cuts that might be expected of a long hand-pulled blade as it starts into hard material. That may be because these cuts were made as the blade was coming out of a cut above it, and it was held firmly in place by the rock above it. We know that the stone box in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid was cut with a very large saw, one which was longer than the box, perhaps 10 feet. The marks on the bottom of the box were discovered and described by Flinders Petrie. He also described an error in cutting that went off the mark before the workers noticed to back out the saw from the cut and start over. These questions could perhaps be answered if microscopic examinations of the cut marks by contemporary specialists in manufacturing technology could analyze them. The works of William Flinders Petrie pioneered this research in the 1880s. Petrie, in Egypt particularly, he showed there was an order or protocol for creating artifacts that involved the use of simple geometries, and such as simple radius over how radii are combined to create a shape where one radius would lead to another radius that would then be tangent with a flat surface. and you find that at Giza near the pyramids, and also other places around Egypt. There are so many remarkable artifacts that really have not received that much attention in conventional literature, and the simple methods that are described by Egyptologists don't really answer the question of how these artifacts were created, because it's not just a matter of describing a tool and how you actually remove material from a block of granite, but also a range of instruments that would have been necessary to ensure that the measurements are consistent throughout the creation of those artifacts. The tools to measure are equally important as those used to cut, drill, and polish. Those tools don't exist in the archaeological record, nor have they been even suggested in the conventional literature that they did exist. So it's an open question right now, and it's certainly open for study by Egyptologists or universities who would care or dare to take up the challenge. And that challenge is to be able to come up with methods that would explain these artifacts in a way that modern engineers would understand and believe. Unfortunately, in the past, this has not taken place. We've not been directed or shown by people in Egyptology or in academia. We haven't been shown any methods that will adequately explain the creation of these artifacts. For example, perfectly flat surfaces that you find on the igneous rock or the granite and basalt diorite artifacts that occur all over Egypt. You'll find a very large block in the Valley Temple near the Sphinx at Giza. There's one wall where there is a diorite block that shows a high order of precision, being extremely flat. Comparative measurements using a very precise straight edge show precision to 1/10 the thickness of a human hair. Whilst this is extremely precise, you also find those kind of surfaces in the Great Pyramid and the granite box in the Great Pyramid, also the Second Pyramid. There are numerous very large, what they call sarcophagi, in the Serapeum, and these sarcophagi are supposedly built to bury bulls. But the precision and the size of these boxes that seem to indicate a much higher purpose. One that would serve a technological purpose, rather than just for a funeral. Because on the inside of the boxes, you not only find very precise, flat surfaces, but also the corners where one surface meets another are extremely square. Also, the wall of the inside of the box where it meets the lid is extremely square. The fact that these artifacts and work materials exist has not been adequately explained in the literature we're trying to understand to really come to grips with. Egyptology isn't trying to come to grips with anything, even how we will create these artifacts today, because it would really stretch our capabilities to make these artifacts, particularly the ones in the Serapeum. But these are fairly simple geometries. We go from the simple to the complex, and then it becomes a little more difficult to explain, because not only a flat surface is fairly simple to understand in terms of how you would grind a surface flat now. When we move to more complex surfaces, we find that there are objects that have curved surfaces, or radii, and gathering the information about those, I've tried to determine how they were created. And gathering the information about those, I've tried to determine how they were created. But before you can actually do that, you have to determine exactly what it is that you're looking at, and that you can't do that without taking measurements. So taking measurements of those artifacts. When you have complex compound surfaces and compound radii that flow from one to the other, and also they seem to follow a general direction, or the contours are maybe cut, and then that contour flows along a straight line, and that straight line on an axis is very precise, to almost as though it would be made on a machine. And that, of course, is a very controversial suggestion. In today's world, you have to consider that because the tube created any other way, it would be enormously difficult. And certainly for an artifact that's supposed to be part of a construction, it wouldn't require that much of that high precision if it was just for our construction purposes. If it was made by hand, it would take an enormous amount of time for you to create that precision, and it wouldn't be necessary anyway. Those are the kind of questions that need to be asked when we look at these artifacts. It's a question of what tools would have been used to create it, and when we ask those questions, we tend to lean more towards the fact that the machines or the tools that they were using to create them were capable of no lesser precision and what appears in the piece. Flinders Petrie was very outspoken on these issues over a century ago, stating, "The methods employed by the Egyptians in cutting the hard stones, which they so frequently worked, have long remained undetermined. Various suggestions have been made, some very impractical, but no actual proofs of the tools employed, or the manner of using them, have been obtained." Amazingly, he recognized the immense importance by today's standards all the way back then. He gave detailed analysis of engineering enigma. The typical method of working hard stones, such as granite, diorite, basalt, etc., was by means of bronze tools. These were set with cutting points, far harder than the quartz which was operated on. The material of these cutting points is yet undetermined, but only 5 substances are possible: beryl, topaz, chrysoberyl, corundum or sapphire, and diamond. The character of the work would certainly seem to point to diamond as being the cutting jewel, and only the considerations of its rarity in general interfere with this conclusion. In Memphis, there's an open-air museum there with a statue of Ramses, which is lying on its back. One of the things that's looking down the length of the Ramses statue,
Oh my god, thank you for
the
being here.
face seems to be extraordinarily
Thank you for the
regular
sub,
and
Baron. You're the
precise,
man, dude.
and
Thank
particularly
you,
the
Dick.
nostrils being identical
Toad,
on both
Toronto
sides,
Toda, for
which
all the
is
subs
unusual
yesterday
to
and the
find
10 bucks,
somebody
man.
or
Thank you, bro.
some person
Thanks so
with their
much, man.
identical nostrils. The
Like,
ancient
you fucking,
Egyptians
you guys
were
make
being
me
very
feel like,
precise and
first of all, you're my
symmetrical in the
friends, but
creation of their statues.
you guys make me really
In the Luxor
accomplish my
temple,
dream
the head of Ramses on
of
his
streaming.
statue
It's just
is
so amazing.
perfect looking. How could anyone
But I mean,
not
I
find this
think
puzzling?
the best thing
The
is the
famous
friendship
author
thing.
and manufacturing engineer
What we
Christopher
learn
Dunn,
along the way.
who's done so much to bring these enigmas to light, has shown the complexities of this engineering prowess. The symmetry in the Ramses face is very remarkable precision. Overlaying 2D transparent photos shows this amazing feat of engineering. When you realize it's 3-dimensionally symmetric, it becomes mind-boggling at that point. Christopher Dunn is by far one of the most prominent experts on this entire issue. The level of sophistication that the ancient Egyptians had used in creating these statues is simply incredible. The Ramses statue in situ at the Temple of Luxor is not a rogue example. Reportedly, over 100 Ramses statues were created. Another famous one is in the British Museum, and it's in the exact same condition of precision and symmetry. The interesting thing about the British Museum statue
A lot of ab work
Ramses, we
today.
see that there was a mistake in the
Alright,
manufacture of that
thanks for being
statue,
here. We may
where there
raid
was
somebody.
a dig in the corner of the mouth where the tool had cut too deep. And then in order to compensate for that, they had to cut the lips deeper into the face, which created a very sharp cusp. Human hands really didn't have much control over because they did not have to do those mistakes by hand. Again, we return to Flinders Petrie's analysis for insight. Many nations are in the habit of cutting hard materials by means of a soft substance, as copper, wood,
Good stuff.
horn, etc., with a hard powder applied to it. The powder sticks in the basis employed, and this being scraped over the stone to be cut so it wears away. Many persons have therefore very readily assumed, as I myself did at first, that this method must necessarily have been used by the
Dogger.
Egyptians, and that it would suffice to produce all the examples now collected. Such, however, is far from being the case. Though no doubt in alabaster, in other soft stones this method was employed.
Yeah, I'm gonna raid Dogger.
Let us take a
I don't
moment
see
to
Toad
recap
here.
what we
Toad
did.
is not in
What
chat.
we can ascertain or
I don't
accept
think.
from what we know.
We're gonna do it.
They had tube drills with drill bits and the necessary machinery to hold them in place and apply rotational torque.
You're the man,
They had
Toad.
saws
You're the
that
man,
could cut
Baron.
granite with ease
Russ,
and
Moonraker.
precision producing amazing symmetry.
Alright, peace out.
They had the
Thank you for
ability
being
to
here.
work the hardest of rocks, and more often preferred to do
Doggeroni.
so. In addition, they applied their techniques finishing granite in situ, after a block had been placed in a wall or on the surface of a pyramid, which literally boggles the mind. They had the ability to cut, level, and polish granite to a sophisticated degree of perfection. They had lathe machinery that would turn and polish granite, schist, basalt, etc. in ways we've not duplicated in our modern society. They cut extremely accurate parallel limestone joints with such a remarkable flatness over huge surface areas, some 35 square feet or more, a technique they'd mastered before creating the casing of the Great Pyramid at Giza. They had the knowledge and technology to repeatedly lift, maneuver, and delicately place enormous weights of stone at various heights. They had the motivation and means to quarry and move millions of stone blocks. They had the administrative skill to foresee multi-generational works, all that they require for a very long planning and project continuity, whilst maintaining the commitment of many generations of craftsmen, from apprenticeship through retirement of the workforce. Putting it this way, the pyramid builders of ancient Egypt have achieved the implementation of the largest, most ambitious, and